Hello. I've been gearing up to work on a number of videos recently, getting back into the swing of things, I guess. And I've just come up against the fact that I can't ignore the whole HBO Max / Warner Media Discovery culling, I've been calling it, because it's just a lot. It is very significant for just the entertainment landscape as a whole, and specifically as fans of animated shows. It's been really bad news so far, and there have been a couple of waves to the whole thing too, which caused a bit of confusion for me in the first place. So the first big set of announcements was that the newly merged Warner Media / Discovery, which is itself already a massive media and corporate monolith company that has a huge number of other brands within it. Mergers take a long time, and there are a lot of moves throughout the process. There tend to be quite a bit of firings, a lot of shakeup in terms of leadership. It's kind of the water level settling for the new normal. And that new normal can be really bad in comparison to what we had before, and it can be potentially good, I guess. I can't think of a time when that's happened as a result of a major merger or acquisition. But in this case, one of the biggest public-facing decisions here was that apparently company leadership has decided to axe a pretty substantial number of projects that were reportedly basically done. I think some of the estimates were like 90% done in the post-production stage, or like maybe even 95% done. I think the speculation on that was that it's all for tax write-offs. They can say whatever, money they sunk into production and post-production. They can say, oh, that was a loss because it never released, even though it didn't release because they just said it wouldn't. So they're taking those as tax write-offs because it's a business and they just do not care. There was that. That was the first big news item. That got a number of reactions online.
So we have the new Batgirl movie. It's about 90% done in post-production, ready to ship out.
No, I want mother.
And then there was this second round of news. I guess it came a little bit later. I think it was roughly a week ago at this point. And basically, they have also decided to remove 30 plus shows from HBO Max. Based on this NPR article here, which I think is actually pretty good, they had direct contact with Warner, HBO, Monolith, whatever, and they said, yeah, we're cutting a number of shows. Here's a full list you'll see scrolling up the screen here right now. Any big animation fans will immediately notice that a huge number of these shows, I don't know what percentage it is, but a substantial percentage of these shows that are being removed from the streaming service are animated shows, and on top of that, very good animated shows. In fact, quite a few of these I have talked about before on the channel. My video on Summer Camp Island, the first one from roughly 2 years ago, is probably still one of the biggest videos I've ever done, and that show happens to be one of my favorites of all time. Not just animated shows, but just entertainment in general. It's really fantastic. I love it to death. But really good stuff outside of that. Infinity Train, Fungies, which is actually pretty nice. A whole bunch of stuff has just been removed, and this is strange. Like this, they cannot count as a tax write-off. That wouldn't make any sense. So the speculation here, or at least what was being said in the NPR article, is that this is to avoid paying residuals. Now, residuals, continuous, more or less continuous payments that you send out to people associated with a particular media property over time. They tend to be relatively small payments, and depending on your role with that property, it might be a significant amount, it might be very little. In fact, actors and such who play bit parts can get residuals or royalty checks for like a few cents. But anyway, that was the speculation here, is that these shows are being removed from the streaming service because another way to save money, although based on my perspective and based on the information that I have about how the entertainment industry runs and how residuals work, it cannot have been a substantial amount of money. I'm sorry, it just cannot have been all that much money when weighed up against the total revenue / profits of an enormous media company like Warner Discovery. We're getting into bean counter territory at this point. And I could be wrong, I guess. If there's somebody who works on one of these shows who knows how much those residual payouts actually are, feel free to contact me, I guess, if you want to speak anonymously or something. But otherwise, it feels incredibly petty. The internet has been reacting to this news, to say the very least.
Yeah, now you've got to be an expert in corporate mergers, acquisitions, IP, branding, and quarterly income reports just to know where to watch the new reboot of your favorite 80s sitcom.
There have been a handful of videos about it. There have been a number of podcasts addressing the whole thing, various forums, online communities. We were talking about it over in the Patreon Discord for this channel. This is something that people really care about, rightfully so. And the timing is a little bit funny because very recently I put out this video about the nature of subscriptions and specifically got into entertainment subscriptions, right? Subscriptions for movies and television, music. And for one thing, I think it's actually one of the better videos that I've made in a long time. So please feel free to check it out if you missed it or if you're new to the channel or something. Within that, I talked about the massive power disparity that can arise in a relationship between a customer and a company, specifically when it comes to a subscription, as opposed to just a product that you buy as a one-off thing and then that relationship is not sustained. But in a subscription situation, it's an ongoing relationship. And the subscriber, the customer, has so little power within this relationship. You basically just have to put up with any decisions that the overlord company you're subscribing to makes. Whatever they decide to do, for one thing, they might not even tell you about things that they're changing. They might not even tell you about prices going up on your subscription. That's a whole other kettle of beans. It's not good. In most situations where there's a massive power disparity in a long-term relationship of any kind, it can cause problems. It can potentially even lead to what we might call an abusive dynamic. And in this case, here we are, we're seeing it where, okay, this giant, massive media company owns an enormous amount of stuff. A lot of people happen to like a lot of the stuff that they own, and they have very little recourse when their access to that stuff is taken away. And this really highlights yet another major concern that we should all have about streaming entertainment now and in the future, is the whole topic of media preservation and continued access to media. I mean, heck, it's even a whole subgenre of YouTube at this point, is lost media. It is incredibly concerning, the idea that now we're in a place where we stand to lose access to a huge amount of media, and because that media was native to the cord cutter era, the streaming entertainment era, a lot of it doesn't actually get released physically. And that's one of the interesting things that's come out of the online reaction to these cuts, is that a lot of people are saying, oh, well, this reinforces the idea that physical media is incredibly important. This is also a general sentiment that you run into a lot in the video game community. There are tons of people who are really into collecting, specifically for the purposes of having continued access to their games, because stuff can just disappear. Stuff can disappear from a storefront, and an online storefront might decide to revoke your access to a particular game for whatever reason. That's no good. The stuff isn't preserved. Also, a thing that you paid for could just be taken away in the blink of an eye. What's your recourse there? What can you do in response to that? There's some pretty obvious issues with physical media, even for stuff that has been released on physical media. It degrades over time. It's just a natural thing. They're physical products. They don't last forever, even when you take really good care of them. For a few years now here, I don't know, I think a lot of us, myself included, operated under the assumption that, oh, well, it's all okay because this is just the future. Like, they have these massive libraries of media. The biggest threat before this was just in terms of one company/streaming service sniping a particular property for their own service. This is worse. Just having it removed by the company that has sole ownership of that property, where else can it go? In terms of like some light predictions of what could happen to some of the fantastic shows that are being removed from HBO Max, it is totally possible. It'll probably just go to the highest bidder. You can watch SpongeBob on a number of different streaming services at this point, some of them with ads, some without, all that kind of stuff. It varies by region as well. There will probably be a place for these shows. There will be something. Somebody will offer a certain amount of money, and Warner Discovery will either say, no, that's not enough, or okay, that's enough, fine, here you go. You can have this for X number of years or whatever. It's not a safe home for all those properties, because we've seen how many other streaming services have come and gone relatively quickly, and especially when we look to the long term, who knows? Who knows how many companies are actually going to last? Probably just the biggest ones. It's a lot. Are you getting that from my general tone and my frantic pacing right now? It is a lot. It represents a massive shift to the entertainment landscape and to our relationship with media. Up to this point, streaming entertainment seemed like an A-OK solution. It was a way for us to move forward. It was a way for companies to move with the times and advance, and ultimately a way for them to make a lot more money from these properties as opposed to selling them physically or, have them up on TV when barely anyone's watching live. And that's just not the case. That assumption was just plain incorrect, and we don't have many options here. There's not much we can do, which is probably the saddest part of the whole thing, outside of some kind of massive boycott, but I'm sorry, I just don't think in this case specifically that's gonna do much at all. I don't. In none of Warner Discovery's actions so far do I get the sense that they have any amount of interest in listening. They are not in listening mode. They are in bean counter mode. They are just doing some hungry hippos, grabbing as much as they can, cutting as many costs as they can. I don't think they're going to pay too much attention to a boycott, especially if it's from a relatively small group of people. Again, these shows that they're cutting, they claim that they're relatively unpopular. On HBO Max specifically. So even there, apparently we just don't have the numbers required to make a big impact in this situation. Probably the biggest downside here, not for us this time around, but for Time Warner, Virgin, Coca-Cola, Trader Joe's, that they haven't considered, clearly they haven't considered, or they're not listening to the people who are raising alarms about this, is the PR angle. And if it wasn't already obvious from the internet backlash to this whole situation, this is terrible for PR. This is equivalent to setting up a row of bear traps along the side of your bed so that when you hop out of bed, there's like an 80-90% chance that you're just gonna step right in one and your day is ruined. You might lose the leg. That's how bad a move this is from a PR perspective. And as someone who's worked in PR for a number of years, unfortunately, it boggles my mind. I cannot picture the scenario. I wish I was there in the room where somebody in marketing somebody in PR was told the news, here's all the stuff we're gonna cut, and by the way, we're either gonna tell the press or they're gonna find out immediately and it's gonna spread like wildfire. And they hear the news and they just go, excuse me? Is this your way of firing me? You're just making my job an absolute nightmare for the foreseeable future? What on earth are you thinking? And here, I think it's also great evidence of the fact that the bigger the company, it seems, and the older the company in terms of leadership, the less they seem to understand the internet and fandoms. I'm sorry, I get from a financial perspective that you just look at the number of views of a particular media property per week, per month, per year, whatever, and you kind of translate that to actual revenue, how many people are sticking around on the service and paying you money specifically to watch that thing. I get from that angle just saying, oh, these have relatively low numbers, cut them. Nobody cares about them. Well, as we know, here in the cord cutter generation, that is not the only way to gauge interest in a show by far anymore, on streaming, on TV, whatever. And we saw some of the growing pains, I would say, in the early 2010s, where there were a number of TV shows that were not performing well at all in terms of standard ratings because no one was tuning in live, but there was a massive community for the show, either online, people watching it after the fact, people streaming it when streaming wasn't such a huge thing. Community in particular, which used to be on NBC, is a great example of that, where the ratings were pretty darn bad, but meanwhile the community was really energetic and large, and it was highly online because it was a younger audience, and that's where people were watching things. And especially with this stuff, even if we just look at those animated shows, Summer Camp Island alone, if you're watching my channel, you already know how fantastic that show is. You know how enthusiastic the fan community for that show is. You know how much fan art there is. You know how many people are cutting up clips and putting them on YouTube. People really care. And I don't think that a company like this, I just don't think they're looking for that kind of stuff. And as a result, it's just a total lack of understanding of how much interest people actually have in a show, what kind of fan base it has, and in what ways those people are giving you money. It has come back to bite them immediately. It was an instantaneous backlash. We'll see if that backlash extends beyond just PR, extends beyond just a huge amount of negative sentiment for the company. I don't have high hopes for that, but I definitely think that it's proof of the fact that they don't know. They don't understand how people interact with media and consume media now. If you nuke fan bases and even worse, nuke their access to the media that they love. For one thing, customer relationship is gone. You have burned the bridge with all the pyrotechnics in the county. And beyond that, how do you plan to handle future properties? Is everything just on an immediate timer? Or if it doesn't give you the numbers you want within, like, I don't know, 6 months, a year, 1 or 2 seasons, that not only do you cancel production, but you also don't let people watch it anymore? That's terrifying. Really, really terrifying. And I kind of hate to say this, but you know what? You're really encouraging piracy. I'm sorry, in a lot of cases, having a pirated copy of something is probably the most reliable way to have continued access to it over time. Some companies understand that. They've offered really convenient and great ways to access media legally in a transaction form, or the customer pays the property holder money for it. And then there are other companies that just don't understand the first thing about that. And so it gets pirated, and you make no money from it at all because you're not giving people a way to do that. You've shut down the cash register, and meanwhile, people are waving their money around, and you just don't care. Wild. Honestly, probably the biggest thing that I want to share here is just that I'm sorry. I'm especially sorry to people who are cord cutters like me. They've left like cable television, satellite television behind a long time ago, and they're not going back, or they don't have access to it, and so streaming was the only way for them to watch these shows, especially just with the quality of the shows that have been cut. It might sound kind of corny, but my heart goes out to people who really enjoy them, because especially for anyone for whom this stuff was comfort media, it ends up being a pretty substantial loss. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it is a problem, and in this case it just feels so completely unnecessary, and it kind of upsets me quite a bit. Outside of that, again, I do think a lot of this ties into my video on subscription, so please check that out if you're interested. I think I made 1 or 2 good points in there. And if there are physical editions of these shows already out, say goodbye to those reasonable prices, because I'm sure they just spiked. But honestly, I just need to stop talking now, and it's way too hot. I'm sweating like a dog. I don't think dogs sweat. But that's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.